Greetings, empathy heroes. Hi. Hello, it's me, Nolan Wells, creator of You, Me, Empathy. Today's chat is with the wonderfully insightful and cat-loving and guitar-shredding human Benjamin Dewey, in which we explore the topic of grief and how loss can motivate us. What can we do emotionally and mentally to counteract the Voldemort of our time? Look out for that. And thanks for empathizing with us.
La 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 la. You, me, empathy. Yeah. La la la.
Hey guys, it's Known. I have the flu, and I'm recording this quick promo disclaimer segment of You, Me, Empathy. You, Me, Empathy is on Twitter and Instagram at You, Me, Empathy. We also have a Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/YouMeEmpathy. That link will be in the show notes. The Facebook group is an extension of this podcast, and I want to create a strong, passionate, kind, empathetic group of people who want to share with one another, be open with one another, and be vulnerable, and all that stuff. That's a good thing. So go there. Links in the show notes. And don't forget to rate and review and subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. I like 5 stars, but you're your own person. Be true to yourself. That's all I ask. And if you want to be on the show and contribute or just chat with me, I'm at youmeempathy@gmail.com. And lastly, I will just say this. I am not a mental health professional. My friend Tony is, who will be doing regular segments on You, Me, Empathy. He's the mental health professional. I'm a feely human like yourself. Okay, I love you. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 2 of You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this overwhelming and magnificent pale blue dot. Benjamin will like that. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire further dialogue and insight so we can, together, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. You, Me, Empathy is a safe place, conversation between friends, a place to inspire the empathy and beauty in all of us. Thanks for being here. Today, in episode 2, I'm honored to continue this empathy journey on the topic of grief and how loss can motivate you with musician, Carl Sagan superfan, and comic book illustrator Benjamin Dewey. Hi, Benjamin.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's so excited. I'm very excited to have you. This is episode 2, and your eagerness and support of the show and to be on it in the early going is very heartwarming. So thank you for that.
Oh, of course. I realize that the topic we're going to be delving into sounds kind of heavy, and there will be times where if I'm going through my own podcast library, I'll avoid it. But I want people to know, if they're just getting to this part of the episode, that I don't necessarily intend for it to be a thing that is dour and gloomy. I feel good about what I've learned from the experiences that I've had, and I'm hoping that I can pass some of that on.
Oh, that's great, and that's a really good point, because we do have dark moments in our lives, but the stuff that we learn from them is very impactful, and I hope it's a means to find some empathy and relatability with each other and to grow from it. Like that's kind of how we grow through our experiences. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's, before we get into you, Benjamin, let's do a quick check-in. How are we feeling this week?
Yeah, I listen to a fair number of political podcasts where, particularly, I'm trying to remember what her name is, but she does a podcast for Crooked Media. The guys John Favreau and John Lovett and Dan Pfeiffer, those guys. Anne Marie Cox is her name, and she always says, "I'm doing fine in Trump-adjusted terms," which, I guess I think that too, and I know that it's can be just anxiety producing to say that person's name, not Anne Marie Cox, but the other guy, the Voldemort of our times. But yeah, I have. Mostly I feel good because I get to play in a rock band with my brother, and I have a wife that I love, and my cats are mostly nice to me. But yeah, there are definitely times where I am frustrated with things, and I cannot believe the state of the world currently, because it tells me things about people around me that I don't necessarily want to know. On the subject of empathy, I think that there's something about knowing that people who are close to me made that choice that, to me, skews a perspective on their ability to empathize with people who are not like them. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't paint a rosy picture of that aptitude.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that myself. Do you find that listening to those types of podcasts is, sort of exacerbates the anxiety and the sort of nervousness?
I think that if you listen to too many of them and you're not aware of the effect that it has on your mental state, then yeah, it can be bad, because at a certain point there's diminishing returns from how much information you're taking in. Like if you listen to a podcast full of people who are really well informed about the Supreme Court, although they're not necessarily Supreme Court watchers. And okay, you've got the basic rundown of what's on the docket, but then you go further to listen to another podcast that's going to talk about the intricacies of legal strategies and all this stuff. That can be great, but unless you're preparing for a debate with another person, which I think for a while a lot of us were, and with our relatives or close friends or what have you, that can be a problem. I realized I was way overloading how much information I had, and I was trying to engage with simulated versions of my relatives, or thinking about what would I say if a person said this to me. And that's a problem, because you can get yourself into a spiral of straw men and hypothetical what if scenarios where you just get mad at a person who doesn't exist or a scenario that hasn't arisen.
Yeah.
My friend Layla Del Duca has this thing that she says to me whenever I start to spin out, or she did at one point, and I think about it all the time now. She said, "Has it happened to you yet?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, don't worry about it then." That doesn't always apply, but it happens. It happens a lot. And some of these podcasts, the guys on Pod Save the World, Pod Save America, they say things. John Oliver says this kind of stuff too. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So conserve your energy. Do what you can, and then take time for mental well-being. That if that means you got to play guitar for 2 hours, or play Skyrim for a weekend and not check your phone, pick your issue, pick your thing, and try and put some good energy towards that. Don't have it be the thing you're always thinking about, because you'll burn out.
Yeah, and having those touchstones of wellness and empathy, your cats, your wife, your rock band, those are great things to go back to during those times. I find that, especially as it relates to conversations about politics and Orange Monster leading the world, it's a challenge in the sense that I can inform myself in certain respects in regards to the issues, and that's an important thing, to be a well-informed citizen. On the other hand, the sort of cynical, nihilistic side of me, is telling my brain, hey, look, man, like, the folks that you're trying to convince, like, are never going to budge. So what's the fucking point?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that I think of it, because I heard this conversation the other day with a couple of these people I respect, and they said, what you got to do is listen. And I thought, well, that is true. There's a point at which there are going to be some people who care about you and who are maybe more apt to, if it comes up, it depends on whether it comes across as a thing that is inherently antagonistic to that person or not. I feel like I could talk to my father-in-law about it because he is conservative, but he is moderate in part because he'd worked in city government. So some of the opinions he holds, I don't think they're very strongly held. Whereas my mother-in-law, I think her connection to the things she feels is very deep and tribal and emotional. And the threads are all connected. It's like a spider's web. So if you pull on one, you're pulling on all of them. And what you're saying to this person, if you criticize one aspect, even if it's not a thing they care that much about, is, I don't respect your opinions or intelligence. And so you're just wrong, and deal with that. And I think it's the same thing if you criticize somebody's religious beliefs, that's how they feel. They're not just looking at a set of beliefs and operational principles. They're saying, you're criticizing how I dealt with the death of my mother. You're criticizing how I think about the way the world was made. There's all these things. And politics, I think, has increasingly become a domain where people cannot separate a set of operational principles that they think makes the most sense for how we all get along in the country and who they are, right? And this makes me think of a book that I wanted to tell you about if you haven't heard about it, because I think it's helpful in this instance, and it's going to sound contrary because the title is meant to be somewhat jarring, but it's, do you know Paul Bloom? He's a psychologist, a Yale psychologist.
Yeah.
The Case Against Empathy, Rational Compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that a lot. Have you heard any of his talks where he talks about that? I
haven't, but I am aware of it.
The quick breakdown that he gives is this idea that empathy is good in a lot of situations. It's a very helpful thing, particularly in entertainment. So I use it a lot when I'm drawing comics or when I'm playing songs. I like to see it when I'm watching a movie. I want to be able to relate to the character and feel what they feel. But it can be a problem in other parts of life, because if you base your decision making just on whether or not you can relate to someone's feelings, there's going to be an asymmetry there, depending on your perspective. So, for example, one of the things that seems to be a problem for conservatives is that they have trouble projecting their philosophy onto the lives of other people, and then really seeing how it may or may not work given other factors. And this affects juries, and so you're likely to side with people who look like you or who have felt the things you felt, and the nature of the way that they feel aggrieved as a group, as a tribe, is perfectly embodied by he who shall not be named. He's just a big middle finger, and they feel that. Mm-hmm. Whether or not it's rational, they feel like 8 years of Obama was an insult to them. So they're going to pick a guy who is a walking middle finger to everything that guy represented. And so that's the dark side of the empathetic process, is that because he feels to them the way they feel, no matter what he does, he is their icon. And I've heard people say this, that their connection to him is not rational. They know he's not a good person. On some level, they know he's bad or ignorant or all those things. but he is a icon, a avatar of their emotional makeup.
Yeah. So how does rational compassion sort of remedy that situation, or does it?
Yeah, well, so I think that what it can do for you or for me when we're at our most frustrated is understand the feeling that a person is feeling without necessarily trying to put ourselves directly in their shoes. So Paul Bloom gives the example of you don't necessarily know what it feels like to be drowning to want to save the drowning girl. And it doesn't necessarily help if you're drowning too.
Yeah.
So I think it might have been Dan Pfeiffer on Pod Save America who said, you get into a conversation with somebody, you can talk to them about policy. And I don't know, it was John Favreau, President Obama's former chief speechwriter. He said, when he's talking to his relatives, he'll say, "What about healthcare policy don't you like?" And they'll say, "Well, I don't like this." And he'll say whatever the remedy he thinks there is. And so instead of it being about what you feel about a person, you can talk about the nuts and bolts of a thing. And that's where the degree to which you're informed can matter. Now, if you're talking to somebody and you say, well, this is the thing that I've learned from this source, I think it's accurate. If you trust me, trust my sense of whether or not this thing is true. And maybe in the future, knowing this will help you think differently about this issue or how it's connected to X, Y, and Z. And so I think that part where we don't necessarily mirror the other person's emotions or we don't tee each other up with the things that, although they can be really useful at times, can also have a similarly or mirrored effect of being a thing that mires us in, I notice that if somebody says something where they're frustrated, and then maybe if you are a naturally empathetic person, you mirror that frustration, and then they can read that as you being frustrated with them, and it just becomes this whole cascade, a Jenga tower that comes falling down.
Yeah. Yeah, I've experienced that personally.
Yeah.
As being someone who is, I think, I've built up a lot of sort of empathy powers.
Yeah.
Just based on my experiences, choice or no choice. It's sort of the place that I've come, and I see your point. Like, I think that's a good point because I have personally experienced situations where I've embraced empathy, and it has got me into sticky situations where I'm like trying to like take on too much, right? Take on too much emotionally.
Yeah, and I think that's Paul Bloom's point. And there's another guy whose name I'm blanking on. I tried to look up all the things I might want to mention to you, but I think he's a professor at Oxford, and he talks about this it's not reasonable altruism, but it's looking at how much can you give without necessarily sinking your own boat. And like his thing is he gives something like 25% of his income.
Wow.
Because he feels like, all right, well, I can do that and pass this threshold if I do this. And you have this with emotional currency, that if you give too much of your emotional energy, you can reach a point where you burn out. And that's Paul Bloom's point too, which is that, there's a threshold over which if you're a person who is a doctor or a caseworker for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness or these other things, that you have to compartmentalize sufficiently that you don't take on the weight of every client that you have.
Yeah.
And like this other thinker who I like, who is sometimes controversial, but I think mostly because people don't listen to him in detail, is Sam Harris, where he said, you do want a doctor who, if we were to give you a really bad prognosis, begins to cry as he's telling you. Like, well, no, not necessarily. And if you have somebody who's trying to treat you for your problem, and say it's a thing like cancer, and your oncologist, she begins to cry as she's administering your chemo treatment. It's like, no, you want a person who is steady and doesn't necessarily mirror your feelings.
Yeah.
Like in that instance. And that's where I think it's good for us to think about, in what instance is it good for me to show a person I understand how they feel? And in what instance is it good for me to say, I understand in principle what you're going through, and I don't need to feel what you're feeling to be of use to you in this instance. And I think that's, whether it's a political conversation or somebody that you care about and love is going through a hard time, there are going to be moments where they need you to be, to use your empathy powers, or they need you to be Spock.
Yeah.
That's a talent that I think that is hard to cultivate, but is going to be increasingly necessary as we go forward with the way that the world is unfolding.
Yeah. No, and I think for the listeners, I think that's a great point in regards to just checking back in with yourself and just self-care, because there's certainly times in my life where I've taken the sort of like, I'm trying to control the emotions of others thing a little bit too far, or I'm trying to just do way too much emotionally, and then I'm not looking out for myself, and then I become this sort of this vessel that really is useless to others. And especially myself. So it's I think that's a good lesson for all of us to say, hey, empathy is good, but to a point. We need balance. We need to understand how it's affecting us and all that. So yeah. I was just taking a good self-assessment every now and then, and making a determination about what it is that you need to be able to give at moments where it's crucial. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I try and do that pretty regularly. I think to myself, am I hungry? Did I just listen to too many political podcasts? What am I doing? Yeah. How does that serve you in any recent examples of how that served you in your relationship with Lindsay?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, like anytime that, she and I have a disagreement, which is pretty rare, you just try and, put yourself in a situation where you trace back the events, like a Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes sequence where you're trying to map out, well, what happened here?
Great
reference. Did I say this thing? Yeah. And did I exacerbate it by saying this other thing that I didn't have to say? And I said because I was mirroring her frustration with me. So we did that last night about, putting the cap on the mouthwash.
Classic.
And like, it's a thing that it's perfectly reasonable for her to ask, but I was tired. And when she asked me, maybe the response I gave was a little sharp. And then she was like, all right, well, I don't have any good way to ask you this. So, where are we at with this?
Yeah.
And, once we got in bed and we talked about it a little bit, it's like, well, I'll try and be better. I'm like a kid where if you say this thing to me, I suddenly flash back to some moment in my childhood where somebody's telling me to clean up my room or whatever. And the reactions you have they're natural, but they may not be reasonable.
Yeah.
And so I try and do that kind of thing and separate those elements and try and take into account and be ready to apologize and be ready to make a commitment to better behavior, and hope the person on the other end is open to the prospect that it's going to be an ongoing process.
Yes.
So yeah, we do that, I would say pretty regularly, but I think we're making progress, and neither of us is the kind of person who ever yells. And I think we're also aware of the fact that if we're frustrated about something else, we try to avoid allowing that to intrude into how we interact with each other. And that's what, at least in part for me, has made my partnership with my wife valuable and enriching, is that we both are predisposed toward that orientation. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. That's so amazing. And you said an important thing, and the word is process.
Yeah.
It's a process, and that's, I think, like an overarching theme in the show. I suspect it will be, because growing through mental health, learning through mental health, battling with mental health, like it's a process. It will always be a process. We will do well at it at times. We will not do well at it at times, but we have to be patient with it. We have to be kind to ourselves and understand that it's a process.
Yeah, I mean, I think even the notion of the self is a process, and that's a thing that people lose track of too. That they think of the locus of their consciousness as being, oh, that's me, but the me that you are is contextual. The me that exists is contingent on, well, who's around you? You know, what is the circumstance that you're in? And that, I think, is the thing where the notion of grief and loss and impermanence is important. Because if you're in a situation where you're just desperately attached to everything that's around you, and we all know on some level there's only one guarantee, and that guarantee is that things are going to change. Yeah. And that by its very nature, one logical step in that admission is that you're going to lose people you love. You're going to lose things you love. You're going to lose circumstances that you've come to rely on. And if you think of life as a process, if you think of the self as a process, an ebbing and flowing cloud of probabilities, like electrons around the nucleus of an atom, then I think that it allows you to be more flexible when stuff comes up. And so you're not just like, well, and that's true of opinions. It's true of politics. It's true of your sense of your own creative output. Like, I'm this person. I do 5 drawings a day, and today I only did 4, so I'm a miserable failure. No, you got to be open to the prospect that, sure, goals are good. There's this really intense dude named Jocko Willink, who I sometimes like to look to as a paragon of self empowerment. He's really intense. He's like if an anvil and a side of beef had a child. Oh my goodness, that's super intense, disgusting. Yeah, he's like he's a former Navy SEAL, and he has this whole book about self ownership and whatever else, and he posts photos on his Instagram of getting up every day at 4:30 and crushing it, and like, oh no, not the crushing it. Well, like for him, it's like, this really intense bodily workout, and he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, and he's one end of this pendulum swing. Yeah. Where I think like, okay, if I have an avatar of a person who is relentless and committed to a very specific sense of self-empowerment, he's that for me on a certain level. Mm-hmm. And then there are people who are just the perfect embodiment of sort of beatific calm, and everything's cool, and don't worry about it, and your attachments to things are a prison. And I like to think that there is a spectrum of lots of different things. Most of the things I now see as a cloud of probabilities, or a spectrum of motion, or a process, and moving up and down those things, and just not punishing yourself for where you might be in regards to where you think you should be. Yeah, is generally the thing that helps me stay mentally healthy. That's great. Yeah, no, I think that's super important, because I think we as humans, we want to create our identities, right? We want to establish our place in the world. We want to separate ourselves from our parents. We're independent, powerful human beings, but also, and that's great. And those are that's a great motivator. But at the same time, it is important to remember that, like, as you're pointing out, the contextual importance, and how we change, and that we will change, and there will be change around us, and the impermanence, to use your word, of that will change us. And that is hard. That's difficult sometimes, because we get comfortable with who we are, right? We like to tell ourselves who we are, and that is supported by, our relationships, and validated by, I publish a thing, and I write a thing, and then someone, and then I get all this great feedback, and it's like, oh, I'm a writer.
And now I feel all this pressure to do more writing, and then I'm feeling anxious and, and nervous, and
Yeah.
and so it's just it's difficult to be okay with the impermanence sometimes, and I
Right.
think it's okay to have anxiety around that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember this guy's name too. He's a TV writer Norman Mailer. I heard him on a podcast where he said, like, that's the thing that drives him crazy about having a person in a position of power who does not feel like you can count on them for anything. It's like the total embodiment of impermanence is a person who doesn't feel steady even in their positions.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I think he said he'd written to every president since FDR and said, regardless how old I am, I need a parent in the White House. And if I don't have somebody, I mean, and that's, I think, the thing that when you're a kid, right? Like, your parents are some combination of how people often later look at God.
Yeah.
Or they also see them as, the person that they're modeling themselves after. And so there's a bunch of things, either in, in a positive way or trying to do the reverse, trying to not embody the characteristics of that person. It really depends on the parent. Obviously, like, not every parent-child situation is ideal. But as you get older and you have your own experiences, you can reflect on the choices your parents made, and they suddenly become mortal. And it's a microcosm of the journey of human knowledge, right? So you have this sense of, there's a God, and he lives on a mountain, and he shoots lightning bolts, and there's all these things. It's very concrete. And then as you learn more, thankfully, through science and human exploration, on top of the mountain, there's a bunch of goats and stuff. But I went up there and there's no God, so I don't think he's there. Well, maybe he's in the clouds. And then so, like, your sense of the person you're trying to emulate, it retreats. And then you realize, like, well, maybe there's a kind of platonic ideal. There's this version of this person who I really admire. And at their best, they're that. But then I don't necessarily want to put that pressure on them, and you have a different relationship with them. And I think that can deepen and be more interesting than that's the hard part, is you give up this one assessment of how a thing is supposed to be, and you can look at it differently. And I think oftentimes, even though it feels like you're giving something up, you're really, if you're cultivating a positive outlook on the world, you just got a new gift. You just got a new thing that allows you to process the world differently. And that doesn't always mean that it's comfortable. Yeah.
That's beautifully said. And I think if we don't have that, we're not growing ourselves. And then, that's a disservice to us. And then I think those around us. Like, I know I have people in my life who are sort of stuck in their own sort of religious, outlook on life, and that's the lens with which they view the world, and they're not open to any other sort of perspective or a viewpoint or change. And to me, like, it's frustrating, but it also makes me a little sad sometimes, knowing that there isn't growth there,
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think, like, that, to speak specifically to the topic that we were introduced earlier, the idea of grief and loss. Like, I find that this weird contradiction about, particularly, like, conversations I have with my own mom, where her whole thing is, like, she's very committed to Catholicism, and she claims to be a person who believes in heaven and oneness and love and all these things. But she is in deep denial about the degree to which she has been mourning the loss of her parents. And even though she had been divorced from my dad for, 17 years or something, when he died too, because they all died close together. My mom lost her parents and her ex-husband, who she, I think, in many ways is still very much connected to, at least in her own way, over the span of about 3 months. And so because of her Catholicism, she lives in this limbo, this neutral zone of, well, I'll see them again. Well, maybe I won't see them again. Well, maybe I'll see them again. And it's this back and forth where she can't necessarily commit fully to the notion that she had this relationship, and this relationship ended because of a natural process of entropy in the universe. And that means that she is the torchbearer of who they are or were. You don't get to have that relationship anymore. And the religious thing to me is this weird halfway point where, like, you can't, I think that people know on some level that there has been a major shift, and it's irreconcilable with this rosy picture that a spiritual plan of action seems to portray. I think that it is a deterrent to going through the process of really acknowledging the shift in what has happened.
Yeah.
That's the part that frustrates me, is that, like, her commitment to this ideology prevents her from doing the real work necessary of healing. And that's what makes me crazy when people say, well, don't you think it's comforting? I'm like, it's comforting to a certain extent, but, like, you can tell that these people don't fully believe it. And they always have these crises of faith because the modernity is encroaching on their sense of things. And if you explore the notion of, like, just how many living beings have there been on the planet, like, what is the arithmetic of souls? This notion of heaven that you have, what does that mean? And as soon as people start getting into the conversation about, like, well, it's oneness with God, it's eternal rest, it's all these things, I'm like, well, that sounds a lot like the Buddhist notion of extinguishing the flame. Like, you just has a long dreamless sleep, as Carl Sagan said about his own death. That you're just out and you got no more worries, and there you go. And I want it to be a thing where I'm able to have reasonable conversations with my own mom while she's still here, but it becomes very difficult because her particular attachment to this fandom, and that's what it is to me, is it's an operational system that came out 2,000 some years ago, more or less, and she's very attached to it. And she's very attached to it because, like we're talking about earlier, it's a thread in her spider web that's connected to all these other things, to her identity, to her sense of her emotional moorings in the world. And I think that is a tricky thing when you're going through a radical process. That attachment prevents you from being able to really be in a place where you accept certain true things that have occurred, and then use those to adjust your world accordingly.
Yeah. I'm just going to read, just to sort of put us all on the same page here, read a little definition of what grief is.
Yeah.
And I think this is a more specific definition, I would say, and we'll get into what that means and how there are different forms of grief in a second. But this is from the Mayo Clinic. It says, quote, "Grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people, regardless of whether their sadness stems from the loss of a loved one or from a terminal diagnosis they or someone they love have received." So obviously, grief is most commonly associated with the loss of someone, right?
Yeah.
But what we're talking about as well is the change. We can grieve change as well. There's so many sort of forms of grief and sort of motivations to, not motivations, but impetuses to grief. Yeah. Benjamin, would you say that because sharing that story about your mother, very much relate to that. And I can get into that in a second, but would you say you are grieving your mother? in some
Yeah,
ways?
I was just thinking that as you were reading that the Mayo Clinic definition, I'm like, oh yeah, like I was saying earlier about your relationship to your parents as you get older, you don't like if they're not the kind of person who has in parallel matured in a way where their knowledge and wisdom has deepened in a way that is, properly reflects your maturation process as their child, then you start to get to a point where you see them as a regular person and a person with flaws and a person with liabilities and whatever else. And it wasn't until my younger brother moved out to Portland. He's 12 years younger than me. And he started telling me about things that they had done together as a family, because my mom and dad got divorced when I was 2, I think. And then she got remarried when I was 3 to the father of my 2 younger brothers and sister. And once my younger brother moved out here to Portland, he started detailing things they did as a family, where I realized, I was in town. I lived in the same city as them, and I didn't experience any of this. They did not invite me into this family situation. And it made me realize that my notion of who my mom was and the extent to which she demonstrated her emotional commitment to me and my older brother, Aaron, was different than what she had done for my younger siblings. And part of that is just human experience. You just are who you are. You do what you do. And I don't necessarily blame her for those choices, because she's just trying to do what she was trying to be her best self, live her best life. But I think at that point I realized, like, I haven't had a close relationship with my mom since I was, 12 or 13, I guess. And I am committed to a sense of a thing that I now realize is gone. And then in that moment, I had you have these successive realizations. You are always, once you lose a thing, there are little things where, like, you have a mini reconstitution of that experience. Every now and then it will just creep up, and then suddenly the thing will remind you, oh, you don't have this thing anymore, or this person's different than you thought. And then you sort of go through the process of accepting it all over again. I think also realizing how far apart our political beliefs and worldviews are was another thing that I was like, oh, this person is not who I remember from my childhood. They are a different person. And I can love this person because of our shared history and experiences and what they gave me as a child and all these other things. But we are not going to be close. We're not going to be buddies. We can't share certain common experiences because we just don't overlap in those ways anymore. And maybe we never did, but as a kid, I didn't notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, in a long roundabout way, I definitely grieve the loss of my relationship with my mom. And I've tried to tell her a bunch of times. She says, what do you need? What do you want? Because she likes to give things to her kids when she can. I have not asked anything of her since I was about 13. And I say, I want a relationship with you. And then when she doesn't call me, or when I hear things from my younger brother about experiences they had that mirror the kind of relationship I would like to have, that tells me there's a limit on how much she can give. And part of that, I think, is like we were saying, or talking about earlier. She has a deep connection to empathy in ways that I think overcharge her batteries and turn her inward, and then she doesn't have any more to give.
Yeah.
And I've come to that realization, and I'm, to a certain extent, even though I have times where it really bums me out, I don't necessarily find that I want to keep pushing on that door. I'm open to the prospect it could become different, but currently the state of things is such that I'm willing to accept where she's at and take what I can get, and not have it be my expectations are moderated.
Okay.
like attenuated, maybe is the better word.
I think that's valid and healthy of you. Do you think there's any part of her that is maybe feeling grief herself?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's sort of in a constant state of grief, honestly, because like losing her parents and then losing my dad, and even she talks about their relationship in a way that still has a high degree of attachment to those memories, and I asked my stepdad, I was like, she talks about my dad in this way that is sometimes bothersome to me. Do you want me to talk to her about it? And he's like, nah, it's fine. He's easygoing about it, but she talks about my dad like he's still very much a part of her mental landscape and he's a high watermark. But then she also will criticize my dad to me in ways where I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need you to tell me this stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'm aware of the extent to which he was not a perfect human being. But I don't need you to reiterate that. That is your issue to deal with. That is not a thing that it should be a dynamic between me and you.
And it's not your experience. You didn't have that experience.
I think that's also how she feels about her parents. She knows they were imperfect people, but she also sometimes will, what's the right word? She will make them like saints. Canonize, is that the right word?
Canonize, yeah.
That she'll sometimes do that to people that she's lost. And I think we all have a temptation to do that when you've lost somebody. You gloss over the parts where they weren't great or you had issues with them because they're not there to respond. And I think it doesn't necessarily benefit us to, unless you're trying to do some serious work on yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily help to go back and be like, wow, remember that one time my dad said that thing to me and it made me feel shitty? Well, I'm going to focus on that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't have any memories like that, but but I know that she does because I knew her parents and I knew she had a hard life, and I understand why she will recoil from certain situations in her past and not focus on them. But it also can be hard as her child to have real easygoing one adult to another dialogue, because sometimes she slips into this character that she does and where she's predisposed to be negative towards everything. And that's a kind of defense mechanism where how she deals with the outside world. But then these people that she's lost, they're perfect. They could do no wrong. They're great. Sure. I miss them 100%. And like, yeah, all right, well, it doesn't have to be this either or. Carl Sagan's notion of the excluded middle is a thing that I think of a lot. You'll hear these conversations, and as human beings, I think we just like everything else we've been saying, we want it to be settled.
Yep.
I'm a writer. I'm a painter. I'm a person who has dealt with grief, and it's done.
There's good and evil.
Right, and it's like, no, we have these experiences, and you're. Even if you just pay attention to the notion of the way your subconscious will float little ideas into your head, it's never a thing where, unless you are a long-time practitioner of mindfulness training, like some Buddhist monk who's been on silent retreat for 30 years, the likelihood that you're going to be able to fully manage all of the little things that get triggered by day-to-day experiences or a song you heard, to be a human being is to live in a world that is full of prompts that remind you of things that were, and maybe fill your head with notions of things that might be, that you're scared of or looking forward to or whatever, but it can be chaos. And that's the part about trying to be self-assessing and looking at the notion of things you've experienced in terms of grief or loss. And anytime those things come up, instead of dwelling on the parts that make you turn inward and become miserable, try to think about ways in which you can maybe not canonize the person or situation that you are no longer able to connect with, but to focus on the things that are positive about those associations. I do that with my relationship with my mom. Yeah.
That's great. I'm wondering if, I wonder if you can relate to this. I'd imagine you can in some respects. But so my mother, when you're talking about your mother, it made me think of my mom a lot. She's still around, deeply religious.
Yeah.
I was raised as such, and I would say like one of my sort of grieving processes in my life is moving away from religion. And the sort of the moment in my life where I realized I'm going through the motions here. I'm not as passionate as the sort of constructs of the life that I'm living within my family and the Christian schools and stuff would suggest. And so that moment in my life as a late teen where I started to realize, oh, like maybe this isn't for me. That was a challenge. And, fast forward, I'm 36 now, and has become a sort of a thing in my life as it pertains to my family that has become a sort of thorn. And that has been a challenge for me because I feel like I want deep relationships with, my younger brother and my mother, but at the same time, the religion and me not believing in God has become this, like they can't look beyond that, and have said as much. Basically, told me both of them, we can never have a close relationship because I don't believe in God.
Right.
And on the logical side of that, like my mind is sort of blown and thinking about the sort of the things that Jesus Christ, as is written in the Bible, believes in: kindness and love and compassion, all great things. And sort of me trying to wrap my mind around, like, just frustrated with that and understanding, like, there seems to be sort of unintended or just unreasonable amount of combativeness there that I don't understand. And so, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, that has been sort of a grief in my life, and moving away from that, and sort of my relationship with my family breaking apart because of that in some respects. And in their mind, I'm going to be burning in hell for eternity, and that's got to be challenging for them,
Yeah, so my wife Lindsay has a similar background. So I grew up raised by my dad, and I would see my mom on weekends. And my dad was as secular as could be. So we, during the times that I got to spend with him, which is most of the time, if it was Sunday, we would watch Bob Ross and This Old House, and we'd fall asleep on the couch, and it was great.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
And then when I'd go with my mom, she wanted to share Catholicism with us, and she made me do confirmation and all these other things. And it was important to her for these reasons that I think it comes down to a tricky balance of things, right? Like, and this is where I'm suspect of religion on a variety of different levels. Even though it wasn't a thing where I grew up, I'm not rebelling against it. I just realized the liability that it can be, particularly in interpersonal relationships, because if you get to the point where you say, hey, mom, hey, brother, this is this thing that matters to me. If they believe that the final adjudicator of all this stuff is God, you're never going to beat God, right?
No.
And like Jesus in the Bible says things about compassion and goodness, but he also says that if your family doesn't accept your acceptance of him, that you should abandon them. He also says, like, if you don't abide in him, you are cast forth as a dried branch to be put in a pile and burned. So
Right.
it is this weird amalgam of things. We're like, yeah, there's good stuff, but that good stuff comes with some weird doctrine too,
Yeah, that's
where
true.
people can look to it and it can be this tabula rasa for really intense feelings of tribalism and identity and all the stuff we are talking about before. And, my wife, Lindsay, and my good friend, Terry Blass, who's another person you should talk to, because he was a Mormon missionary and he did all the things. And it wasn't until, later in his youthful period, I think his like late 20s, where he came out as gay, and it became this huge wedge between him and his family and his community and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he just worked on a documentary about how that schism between who you are outside of a religious community and who you are inside of it can be an unbreachable gap. His movie is called Latter Day Glory. I did some animation scenes with him for that
Oh, amazing.
movie. It's going to be coming out soon.
Great.
And he went all over the country and he talked to young gay men and women who had been ostracized or who had come into difficulty with their religious community. And you can talk about grief and loss. You like all your friends, all the things you knew, your plan, your program for life is suddenly taken out from underneath you just because you can't bring yourself to believe. It would be like if you never got to experience Christmas on any level if you decided that Santa Claus wasn't real.
Yeah.
And I used to say that to my wife, and she said, "You can't say that to religious people because they are really offended by that." And I was like, well, I don't see a tangible difference between those things. There's positives that come with believing in Santa. There's these nice traditions. It's just that we haven't built 2,000 years of them around St. Nicholas, and we have around Jesus. And that's the problem, is that you're, unfortunately, you as a wonderful, sweet human being with all this richness in your life that you could bring to their lives, they see it as paling in comparison to their imaginary friend who is promising even more. Like, you can't promise an eternity, but this thing that they are attached to certainly seems to.
Yeah. And I think that is a very valid point. And I've thought about that myself. I don't want this to become a sort of diatribe against religion. I do, I do think that we are saying very important things and things that we both believe passionately.
Yeah. I do think though that like the notion of like, where does religion come from? It's important and it's germane to grief and loss, because I think it might have been Joseph Campbell who said that religion came from the first woman who rolled over in her bedding next to her dead husband and wondered where he went. Right. And so like the ritual of religion, the culture of religion is in large part based around the whole notion of loss and death and trying to avoid it. Like, at least in Western traditions, right? Like, so like those things are relevant to how we experience grief and loss. And they're relevant to the interpersonal relationships, and they're relevant to the time you spend on earth trying to have a relationship with people before this deadline that we all know is coming. We don't know when. I wanted to mention this guy, Frank Ostaseski. He is a founder of this thing called the Metta Institute, and he deals with people who are at end of life situations. So he does a lot of hospice, but he also does Zen Buddhism practitioners. And he wrote this book called The 5 Invitations. And the subheading is Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. And the way that he talks about it is, being present in this experience, being in the midst of that process, and then trying to talk to people who are planning for this, like they're cramming for the final exam. And then after that, it's summer vacation forever. And it's like, that's going to be a hard thing if they think that all the reward comes later. You know, And like that's why the religion conversation, as much as it can be uncomfortable for people, is an important one, because you're dealing with the fallout from it right now.
Yeah.
I'm dealing from the fallout with it right now. My wife is dealing with it. My friend Terry is dealing with it. You know, one could say that the planet Earth is dealing with the fallout between these competing attitudes about how we handle death and loss. Like, do you think of it as being this thing where, like, well, don't worry about it? I was walking down the street the other day. I heard these two ladies saying, this world is temporary. It's so temporary. We don't have to worry about any of this stuff. It's all going to be gone, and then everything's going to be great. And I was like, they were saying this stuff out loud to each other and affirming for one another that that's what they thought. And I thought, oh man, if you are committed to that sensibility, really, you're really committed to that, then your ability to make the world better here and now is just naturally going to be diminished. You know, like anytime you spend on the project of thinking the afterlife is what really matters, you are not focused on the project of what is the point? Why spend your money in a spot where why invest in a place that you don't think has a future?
Yeah. No,
That's
agree.
a problem.
It is a problem, and I fully agree. I think, yes, I completely agree. Let's talk about, are there other sort of experiences with grief that you want to highlight, that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So I lost my dad when I was 20, and I was at his bedside when he passed away. And it was intense and hard. And I think that it's important for anybody who's going through it currently. You know, so like I have 17 years of hindsight where I don't necessarily see it the same way. And the further you get away from it, it's not like it suddenly becomes perfect. And, I'm totally at ease with all of it. I miss him every day. You know, like there's, on some level, there are things where I get resentful of people who I think are less worthy of being alive. And, you know, that emotion passes, but I'm angry sometimes. And when I was younger and he had died, I was really angry because I thought the world went a certain way. And then when you have this immediate, no potential to contradict what just happened, it makes it very clear that there is a impermanence to things. Your attachment to things is on some level laughable. And so just trying to figure out what to do with that took me, I want to say like 5-6 years worth of pretty careful introspection. And then sometimes I was just raw and not the kind of person who could have reasonable, considered relationships.
Yeah.
You're just not capable, on some level. And, I listened to this thing the other day. I think it might've been that guy, Frank Ostaseski, saying that we used to have a tradition at least in the West, where we would wear a black armband or we would dress in black. And other cultures around the world have different ways by which they signify the experience of going through loss. But saying, I'm not normal right now, so don't approach me the same way you would somebody who's in a streak of luck where nothing bad is happening to them.
Yeah.
And so I think that going through that period of time and then still having this, like, I guess I think of it in some ways as like a sword of Damocles or something, where I know in a way that is undeniable, the nature of life's finite aspect. And instead of it being a thing where I'm just paranoid all the time, I think, what do I want to do today? How do I want to honor my dad's memory? How do I want to be my best self in accordance with what I learned from him? And it took me a while to get to that point. And Carl Sagan was a big, reference in how to do that, living in the sense of wonder and inquisitiveness and trying to take stock of the things you value in life and make those your priority. And, unfortunate news aside, there is a great interview with Carl Sagan and Charlie Rose that is his last interview. And if you can pretend that a robot who looks like Charlie Rose and hasn't done anything terrible is asking Carl Sagan these questions about his life and about the things he values, it is a amazingly life-affirming, wonderful thing. And any conversation you have, you get to see with Andrew and his widow, his presence is very much alive, and not in this way that seems to hold her back, but in a way that is positive and encouraging source of motivation. And I feel that way about my dad now, where even though I feel his absence keenly, what I try and put in that space, and not deny that he's gone, but try and think, how do I live a life that I know he would be proud of? How do I do the things that, why do I miss him? I miss him because I cared about him a lot.
Yeah.
I miss him because he was a person who had great insight and who was a beacon of charisma and know-how and curiosity and all these things to the people around him. He was a person that was universally liked. And I want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person who you're not sorry you spent an hour with. I want to be the kind of person who introduces you to a new thing that you get excited about.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that combination of a person you love dearly and then their absence, that can be a source of really great, pure motivation. Like, I lost a bunch of people. I think about them all the time, but they're with me in this way where I feel like, okay, now it's my job to try and bring to the world what they brought or what my experience of them was. So my friend Kathy Hasty, my friend Greg Stiles, my buddy Roy Camillo, I've lost a lot of people who I cared about, but I don't allow their absence to be an absence of the things that they brought to my life. You know what I mean? That there's
that's so powerful.
Thank you.
I love that so much. It because we're taking what makes them who they are, and we're
Mm-hmm.
allowing it to live through us and our actions, and allow us to be inspired by the examples that they set, the sort of inspiration that they had, and the sort of aspirational person that they were. Like, that's such a beautiful thing. And I think we can all take lessons from that, because I think it's very easy to go the opposite direction of that.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of this band? I don't know where they're from. They're from one of the Nordic nations. They're called Ghost.
No, I have not.
I have come to really like this band, and there's a song they do. It's called "If You Have Ghosts," and the lyrics are, "If you have ghosts, you have everything." And I think about that with people I've lost, and I'm like, you can see it as a weight that you have to carry around. Like, I've lost all these people. I'm gonna take inventory of all the people I've lost, all the stuff that's gone.
Like a burden.
Or you can think, or you can think of it as like, okay, well, now they are part of my Voltron, and like, I'm gonna take all these things that I learned from them. Like, what would Kathy Hasty do in this situation? Well, she'd go to South America. Like, credit card debt be damned, because you never know.
Yeah.
Or like my friend Greg, he bought himself this Santa Cruz Tony Rice Model D, this amazing acoustic guitar that just was like kicked like a cannon. And he and I played in a bluegrass band. He's like, well, okay, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm going to start this band, and we're just going to play wherever we can play, and it's going to be fun. Or like my friend Roy Camillo, he was doing paintings and like writing songs and stuff right up to the point that he passed away, and he didn't have any money, and he lived in this little spot above a bank, like this tiny little studio apartment, but he was full of life and joy, and he was always trying to improve his technique, and he never stopped. He was just a relentlessly positive dude, and I'm lucky to have known those people, and that's how I think of this. Like, I got to have this experience. Don't be sad because it's over. Be glad because it happened.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've had a lot of loss in your life,
Yeah.
Benjamin, and it's very inspiring to hear that you have this perspective of taking, basically allowing them to live on through you, and you are continually inspired by them in your relationships, in your your work in comic books, your music. Like that's very inspiring, and I love to hear it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wonder if I wrote down this quote from Tolstoy that I really loved. He says, quote, "Only people who are capable of loving strongly can also suffer great sorrow, but this same necessity of loving serves to counteract their grief and heals them."
That's great.
Right? And it speaks to what we're talking about here is the impermanence of life. People die. We are atoms. Things change. But we are also like capable of so much greatness and inspiration, and if we focus on those things and the way those things can make us better people, better humans, better sort of vessels of creativity and inspiration for others, the better off those around us and humanity and the earth will be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's very well put.
Thank you.
I like to think of it as the party's going to end at some point, but you don't put your drink down and wait for it to.
Yeah.
Like dance while the dancing is good. Get out there and make stuff
even if
happen.
you can't dance, goddammit.
That's right. It's like, now's the time, man. The music's bumping.
Yeah.
Like that's why I love playing with my rock band. It's like, I'm 37 and like I'm not gonna be Slash, but
as much as you tweet at him.
That's right. I have grieved that loss, and I'm ready to just be Ben Dewey, playing as great a rock guitar leads as I can.
Yeah.
Shred on my own terms, and I'll do it for as long as I possibly can.
I love it. I love that. I hope to get to see you jam in your band someday.
Oh yeah, it is wonderful to play. Like I also like, that's another thing is like I know it sounds silly after all the serious stuff we just talked about, but like I lament the loss of rock music as a pillar of culture.
Mm.
Like I feel like it lasted for a really long time and it was a good ride. Maybe 50 years or so. But at a certain point, like it sort of fell out of favor, and now it feels almost like going to Colonial Williamsburg. I know there are rock bands that play, but it's not the kind of thing that you hear on the radio. Like if you heard Welcome to the Jungle and you'd never heard it before and it came out in 2017, be like, what the hell is this? It sounds like, even now, I heard it the other day.
This is not the backdrop of a Coca-Cola commercial.
That's right. Like I heard it and I was like, holy crap, this thing is the best anthem to the cynicism about but like also like a refutation and embrace and attitude of this like urban intense grinding of gears that in particular those guys were singing about Hollywood. But it's true of like any city or any situation you're in where you're trying to make your way and there's finite resources. Like I think about it all the time. I quoted an email to my friend Brian Shermer, this awesome dude and a great writer in San Francisco. He's talking about some situation in his business and how he was frustrated. And I said, like Axl Rose says, you can have anything you want, but you better not take it from me. I just like that, like, wow, this is this amazing thing. And it was this moment in time. And that's a thing that while I mourn its loss, I'm sort of trying to do, like I was saying about friends of mine who have passed away. It's like rock and roll is in not the same way, but I think of it as this friend of mine, this comforting presence that I think of as being a process, a flux. There's no clear definition of what it is, but it existed between, like the first time Chuck Berry put on his Gibson and blasted through a Fender Bassman. And then, somewhere around 2002, when drum machines started to become more prominent than physical drums or something, whatever the trail off is. I like to think it sort of peaked in 92, but, it's also the kind of thing where like, all right, well, maybe this isn't a cultural touchstone for everybody, but sometimes that's okay. There's part of me that laments the fact that Star Wars is never going away. You can never mourn it. You can never really fully appreciate it because it never ends.
Yeah.
It's everywhere you go. It's at the pet store. They make Darth Vader themed stuffies. I was in the supermarket and there was a stormtrooper inflatable balloon. I was like, these guys are the bad guys. They are a fascist force that crushes the good guys. Like, there's a weird embrace of this thing, where you've softened it, and it's like, this is the value of things being finite.
Yep.
We care about a thing to the extent to which it's impermanent. It's
the ubiquitousness of it almost makes it less special.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that, it's okay if it transforms. I was listening to this guy talk about scalar laws. I forget who he was, but he's a scientist who was talking about the nature of how cities or organisms or whatever, if they don't adapt at a certain point where they reach a pivotal point of growth, then you start to have this inward destructive cannibalization process. And he was particularly, I think in this instance, was talking about cities. That if your city doesn't adjust in accordance with how many people come into it, like Portland is experiencing this, where it's very popular.
Right.
So lots of people have flooded into it and are trying to make it, some iteration of what they saw on Fred Armisen's television show. But you also then realize, okay, it can't be that. If what it was in part a cipher or a phantom that was based on the experience of people, and it's a process like anything else. But if Portland doesn't appropriately adjust, it'll just stagnate and people will decide it's not all that it was hyped to be and they'll leave. Or it will deflate in some sad way and reach an equilibrium. And that's a weird thing too. It's I don't know, I find that sometimes I am sad about Portland not being what it was when I moved here. But then I'm also kind of excited because stuff has changed and I've met cool people who have come here recently and who add to the fabric. And as long as I don't get attached to what I thought Portland was supposed to be, it can be pretty cool to see the adjustments, or with the case with genres of music. Maybe I'm not super into most of the stuff that comes out, but every now and then you hear some gem and it stands out. It's a bright side that wouldn't have emerged maybe if it was all rock all the time. I wouldn't want that either.
Yeah. Change is inevitable and it's important, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Have you listened to, are you a fan of the Mountain Goats?
Yeah. I have a positive association with them largely because of Steve Lieber, who is my friend and mentor at now Helioscope Studio. And man, he loves him some Mountain Goats and John Darnell generally. He likes to read his essays and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, he's the best. I'm a huge Mountain Goats fan, and I bring it up because I think he's a good example of someone who's sort of constantly sort of changing. Yeah. His most recent album, or maybe the last one, he's put out I don't know, something like 25 albums. I might be exaggerating there, but it's some staggering amount. And one of his most recent albums called Goths. He basically said I want to try to make an album that has no guitar. He's always been a guitarist, and so it's just vocals and drums and stuff, and it's fantastic.
Interesting.
He made an album just based on his love for wrestling.
Yeah.
He's just a fascinating person, and if you have a chance to check it out, he's doing a podcast now with Joseph Finkel of Night Vale fame.
Okay, yeah.
And they created a podcast together called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats. And they are, yeah, it's a funny name, but each season they're breaking down an album of the Mountain Goats, and each episode is a song from that album. So the first season is from their album All Hail West Texas, and so they talk about like the process of creating that music, creating that song, the inspiration for it, and then at the end of the episode, some famous musician, Aaron McKeon, was on the most recent. She does a version of that song to close out the episode.
Awesome. I love her.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah, it's really profound and fun, and he's just one of those guys that sort of inspires me creatively, and someone who's doing well in terms of accepting change and sort of what's the word? Sort of reconfiguring. Yeah, I don't know. Just changing with the times and sort of finding new ways to create, inspiring music and words. And he's just, he's one of those inspirations for me, I guess.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Before we sort of end, I like this. I'm hearing myself think I like to have this segment where we have empathy heroes, but like obviously this is the second episode, so we haven't really established a rhythm here. But do you have any empathy heroes in your life at present?
Yeah, I would say, despite what maybe some criticisms I offered about my mom, when I was a kid, she taught me the earliest lessons I had in empathy. And she would say, don't step on that ant. He's just on his way home to his family.
Oh my
goodness. Or something like that.
That's precious.
And so immediately I had this, there's a whole narrative about what this ant is doing and what's his family life like. And you suddenly start thinking about it in this way where you're not frivolous about how you treat any living thing. Or even inanimate objects. I would anthropomorphize them. It started obviously like you do it with your stuffed animals and whatever else, but I think that's the tendency humans have they do it with their cars, people do it with their guitars. You do it with a lot of different things that are meaningful. So you imbue these objects, you make them into totems. And so I know my mom did that for me. And that's the irony of her now embracing these aspects of Republican politics where, man, she's certainly moved away from certain aspects of empathy in that way. And I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah.
But I would say the roots of my ability to empathize with other people and living creatures, it comes from my mom. Then my wife, Lindsay, has taught me that however strongly held and well-informed your opinion may be, it's not always relevant. It is not sometimes the logic of your position, you got to think about what it is what's your goal?
Yeah.
Is your goal to be right, or is your goal to have a positive interaction with another person? And I've learned that from her. I've learned how to look at culture and not be such a snob about it. And then Carl Sagan is one of my great heroes because he's found a way to allow people into his perspective without making them feel diminished by any incongruity in their own thought process. Mm-hmm. So when he talks about science, when he talks about the process of being mindful, when he talks about relationships like love, he doesn't ever make you feel like, well, I don't understand how to do that, so I must not be as good as him. He's a perfect teacher in that way because he doesn't ever make you feel like you're less than him, even though he is demonstrating that he has put more focus into this particular set of problems maybe than you have in most cases, right? So like
Yeah.
when I think about, who are my guiding stars of people that I try and embody the best parts of their behavior, those are three people who stand out to me as of examples that I like to carry with me throughout most of my waking hours.
Yeah. That's great. And it shows,
Thanks.
you present, because I think you are, as a person who cares and as a person who has, who enjoys meaningful conversations with people, who thinks about his actions, who thinks about how he interacts with the world, and deeply cares for humanity on a level that's inspiring for myself. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I try and remember that, like, it's not that I think we have to be open to the possibility that people we disagree with are capable of change, but not be committed to it happening right in front of us.
mm-hmm.
If
Yep.
that happens, that's great. But for most people, that's not going to happen. Pride gets in the way. Processing emotionally sometimes takes people longer than 10 seconds. And so, like, I think allowing for that prospect, that, like, I was arguing with my mom about gay marriage because she just kept, beating the drum for why she didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
And I kept asking her, but, why is that? And she just had no satisfying answer. She just kept repeating some nonsense truism about a man and a woman or whatever else. Excuse me. And I had performed at this point 3 different weddings for different configurations of couples. And she said, well, Benjamin, I'm just never going to change on my deathbed. I'll iterate this, so I'll say the same thing. And she said, your brother has given up on ever trying to change my mind. And I said, well, maybe I'm more optimistic than he is. Because I do think that it's the kind of thing where you got to be, if we're not open to the prospect that words can change someone's mind, then all that's left is the sort of base physical response, right? So, like, that's true in international relations. That's true in relationships with people who have transgressed against societal norms in the form of crime. We want to be able to have conversations because conversation is the best tool we have for avoiding really unpleasant, terrible things that can sometimes come once we get past conversation. And so, like, I have a tremendous amount of faith in the power of conversation. Mm-hmm. And, not in the naive, like, well, I believe in it because it just helps me to believe it. Not that sort of faith. Maybe more faith along the lines of, there are instances where I have seen it work. And although they are outliers, I think that it's still possible to have instances where that's more broadly spread, and that we can, if we are careful in the way that we approach conversations with people with whom we disagree, they're almost never going to change in real time. But ideas are like seeds that you plant. And if an idea is sufficiently robust, then it can grow in almost any soil, regardless of what you do with it. It's like a tardigrade. Like a really good, a really well-structured idea is hard to ignore, and it can survive. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's possible. I have to hope that that's how we resolve our issues.
Yeah, and what a great lesson for the now. The world that we're living in now, where there is such animosity, there is such very strong positions being voiced and backed up in ways that may seem nonsensical or hurtful or what have you. But if we are open to that, like, I think that's I think that's a healthy thing, because it's easy to shut that down, and then we're not creating that sort of mental and emotional space for maybe change that could potentially come. So I think that's a good perspective.
Yeah, I think it's fair to also, like, if you're engaged in a conversation with somebody who you really disagree with about something, but you still have it's not gotten to the point where you are just ratcheting each other up. If you were to ask them, is there a scenario under which you could have your mind changed, and what would it take? I think that's a fair question to ask. Mm-hmm. Because if a person had, like, I forget what, I have this little chapbook of quotes I made at one point, and I think the quote is, he who knows only his side of the argument knows little of that. Yeah. And I forget who said it, but the idea being obviously that if you aren't open to the prospect, even in your own perspective, of like, what would it take to change my mind? What scenario can I imagine where it plays out differently? And like that guy, Sam Harris, the neuroscientist, who I admire a lot, he calls it steel manning, where instead of straw manning, you try and put yourself in a position where you advance the very best version of your opponent's argument. You don't do any dodges. You don't do any manipulations. You really try and look at it and, like, what do they really think? Why do they think it? And what would it take to convince them otherwise? Like, I think that's a fair place to be with just about anything.
Yeah.
And it's good to do with yourself as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I concur, Benjamin.
We're all agreement here.
Yeah, we're in agreement. We are preaching to our respective choirs. How about let's start to wrap this thing up?
Okay.
I was just going to offer a real quick empathy hero for me to go a different tact. I saw this movie Lady Bird this week. Oh yeah, Lindsay just saw that and she liked it a lot. It's amazing, and I just wanted to shout out Greta Gerwig, the writer and director of the film, and Saoirse Ronan, the star of the film. I was uncontrollably crying throughout the entire movie. Aww. It like, in the most amazing way. Like, I was so, the way she depicted human emotion and, like, real sort of interaction of human emotion and the nuance of it, like, was so, like, it was so spot on, and I was so moved by it. And so that's just my sort of call out to Greta Gerwig for depicting that. Like, that's really, really hard to do. Yeah. And in a sort of full feature length film, is pretty remarkable. And so if you haven't seen Lady Bird, by the time this comes out, it might be streaming somewhere. So go watch it. Yeah, that makes me want to advocate for my own iteration of that, which is the movie Arrival. With Amy Adams and Denis Villeneuve was the director. Mm-hmm. And I'm a hard person to get to cry, not because I'm trying to hold it back. That's this toxic masculinity. We got to break that down. That's right. I mean, like, I'm open to the prospect of it. I just, like, there's definitely aspects of me that are more Vulcan in some ways. Where sure. I just don't. It has to be very specific stuff. Yeah. But yeah, when I saw Arrival, in minutes I was crying. But it also is just like all the stuff we have talked about over the last hour or so. It is a sort of movie that, without spoiling anything, makes a point about talking about time and talking about context and talking about solutions to problems that are unorthodox and our relationship to love. And I have just not ever seen anything quite like it. And it spoke to me in my grief and hope simultaneously in this way, where I felt empowered by seeing a piece of artwork that was that well crafted. It sounds like your experience with Lady Bird is like, this thing is one human being
putting their message in a bottle out into the void, and we happen to get it and totally understand what was written on the paper inside.
Yeah. Arrival is an amazing one. I agree with you. I was also quite moved by that film and was also in tears. I cry a lot, but
if I want to cry for sure, I watch the first few minutes of Up. Every time I think I can handle it, I cannot.
No,
I can't handle it.
I feel like you got to be a heartless robot if you can handle it.
That's right. Like, oh man, you've never loved anyone, have you, robot? Yeah,
exactly. No, that's a great one. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So before we go, I have a few sort of admin things to get to at the end of the show.
Okay.
But why don't you, Benjamin, please tell the listeners where they can connect with you and engage with your awesome work and all that stuff.
You can find me on Twitter at Benjamin Dewey, just like it sounds, BenjaminDewey. That's my Twitter handle. And then you can find me on Etsy. I have an Etsy store where I sell a bunch of prints from my web series, the tragedy series, and other things that I've done, fan art and things like that. I have a upcoming project that I'm doing that maybe by the time this is out, I'll have it ready. It's called Meowsker Town, or at least temporarily it will be, and it's a follow-up web series. It's all humor comics, even though maybe I didn't seem funny to you on this podcast.
Meowsker Town, it's called?
Yeah, Meowsker Town.
That's adorable.
And then I have a book that will be coming out from Dark Horse within the next year. It's a Beasts of Burden with Evan Dorkin, and it's about magical dogs. And then I have a series that I did with Kurt Busiek for Image Comics that's out in 2 trade paperbacks called Autumnlands. And I have a variety of things going on. I'm open to change. I'm the John Darnell of comics.
You heard it here first, folks. Benjamin Dewey is the John Darnell of comics.
Yeah. I'll let John Darnell make that choice. He can
That's fair.
deputize me if he wants.
Yes, so listeners, please go check out Benjamin's work. He's an amazing artist, and the Autumnlands, which I've read, and the Tragedy series are amazing, and you should absolutely get those into your brain pronto.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. And okay, let's do this closeout segment I have here. Okay, special thanks to David Grabowski for the music you heard at the top and at the end of this episode. Be sure to follow You, Me, Empathy on Twitter and Instagram. You can also read my story, The Day I Stopped Eating. All these links will be in the show notes. I'm also thinking about creating a community of You, Me, Empathy listeners on Facebook, like a Facebook group. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. You can reach me at youmeempathy@gmail.com. And let's kick this thing off strong. Let's get ratings and reviews in iTunes. So go there, rate and review. 5 stars is my favorite number. Do that. And thanks for listening.